I've been on a book tour the past 6 months because I published a book about how I work. And so it was surprising to me when I was asked by the Chicago Ideas Week, how do you work? That I didn't really have an answer to it. How do you work as a philosopher is a pretty complicated question. But to give you a background, I want to talk a little bit about what I do, and then I have sort of 4 rules. That's the first sort of early sketch of the kinds of things I try to do when I work. So just to give you a context of what I do is that I work in the belly of some of the most troubled companies on the planet. I've spent a fair amount of time in Detroit lately, as you can imagine. And the type of companies I deal with are the ones that have lost their way, that feel that they don't really know what's going on or what to do. In German, we have a word called Scheue, and Scheue means it's like the kind of feeling a horse probably have when they're stung by a wasp. It's sort of directionless panic. It's a little bit like what I feel about global warming. I'm completely panicking about it, but I don't know what to do. So directionless panic is kind of the mood in these places. And we're then asked to help to think through things. If you are an automotive company, you want to know what's it like to be Chinese and buy cars. It's probably different. For instance, if you live in Michigan, you have a lot of roads. You have the ability to drive fast. If you live in Shanghai, you will never ever go above 15 miles an hour because that's the nature of the place. So what we try to do is to figure out what's the thinking inside of a company. What are the assumptions underlying that thinking? And what's going on in the world? And quite often, there's a big distance between those two things. If you walk up and look in front of any corporate headquarters, and you walk in, it looks to an accountant, I guess, or a lawyer, it looks completely orderly and organized. But if you are interested in the world, it's absurd what's going on in there. Like the kinds of things that are happening in companies when they put down money on things that they've always put down money on, when they invest in things that are silly, when they cut things that are actually vital to the place. So that's the kind of thing we do. We look at worlds and we try to understand what's it like to be in that world. Now, the main point here is that we look at worlds, not at people. And that's a big philosophical discussion that's been going on for 2,000 years, 2,500 years. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be us? And the answer has always been that being human means that you think. You have the ability to think through things. And if you're a philosopher and you sit in your armchair and think about the world, that's of course your experience. That being human means that you think. Now, lately, or the last 100 years, in philosophy that's lately, we know, and we sort of discovered, that that's not the main thing about us at all. The main thing about us is that we can get involved in worlds. So most of the things we do, the way we dress, the way we think about things, the language we use, the way we drive a car, is defined by the world we're in. So if you are interested in becoming part of the art world, for instance, or the world of saltwater fly fishing, or some world, the world of extreme fighting, or whatever you call it, there are particular rules for doing things and not doing things. There are certain things that are meaningful and certain things that are not meaningful. And that's what we're trying to look at. We're not trying to ask what people think about things. We're trying to look at based on what are they doing, what they're doing. So that's the first sort of rule I have, and I have 4. The first rule is, what's the assumption underlying what people do? It's very hard if you come into a very large corporation or you work in whatever you're working on. It's very hard to figure out what's really going on unless you go to the root of things, unless you go to the basis of things. And my sort of philosophical hero says that the main topic you should study is what he calls that on the basis of which everything is understood. So you're not interested in what people say, you're not interested in what people sort of write in papers, you're not interested in any of that. You're interested in what underlies all that. Based on what is that happening? So that's the first rule for thinking like a philosopher, working like a philosopher, is never to take anything for granted and always ask the question, what's underneath this? What are the kind of driving ideas behind this? And if you think about it, that is something that we need a lot in this society. I was staying at the Hyatt this morning, and there was a big conference called the Internet of Things. And they were announcing this as the biggest innovation ever. Okay? Now, if I asked my grandmother, and I actually did that once, I was telling her about my iPhone. And she said, well, that's great, but during my time, we invented the car, electricity, investment banking, modern agriculture, a few things. And you have what? The iPhone 6? Is that what you're bringing? So the underlying assumption under that conference was that the internet is the biggest deal ever, and what we're in the middle of is the biggest sort of groundbreaking innovation time ever. My grandmother wouldn't agree. She would say, that's fine, but it's one out of many things. And lots of things has happened before. So as a philosopher, you sort of think about those things and try to say, yeah, but maybe what's underlying it. And one of the things that's underlying that sort of conference I saw in the Hyatt was about speed. It was about, if you don't get on this sort of bandwagon of Internet of Things, you will be lost and you'll be out of business very soon. It was the idea that we have to keep pace with things. And so that my next rule as a philosopher is slow down. It is, are you really sure that that's the case? Are you sure that that's the way to think about it? And in order to be fast in making decisions, you have to have a sort of time that's very slow, and a very sort of slow metabolism in trying to figure out what's right and wrong. If you've done that, it's easier to make decisions later. And if I think about my clients, last night I had a meeting with the CEO of an automotive company in Detroit, and he takes his days and chops them into 15-minute time slots. So I had 2 of those. And we were talking about the second biggest investment they have in the company, and they have to get into a particular marketplace. And we had 30 minutes to do this. That's again this idea that you have to be extraordinarily fast and chop your time into little minute details. That's only getting more and more absurd with the Internet of Things. Now the new Apple Watch, however beautiful you might think it is, what it does is that it chops your time into little tiny increments where you never ever get time to think about things. And when you only have one type of time, which is a fast type of time. So what you want to do is to have a type of time in your life, maybe 2 hours a day. For me, it's 4 hours a day. That's different. That is of contemplation and of figuring out things, where you do one thing for a long time rather than being disturbed by your watch every second. So we have a rule in my company. We say that every sentence should be on trial for its existence. And that's both in reading and in writing. So when you have that rule for reading things, which ends up as very slow reading then, or writing things, which ends up as very slow writing, it clarifies the mind and it slows you down. And that's the most productive type of time you can possibly have. So the second rule, slow down. The third one is, you can call it counterexamples. It's what philosophers call counterexamples, and it's a very rough thing. So the idea is, when you have an idea about something, the first thing you do is to try to kill it. You try to empty your gun in the head of your own idea. And it's something you don't do much in work. We try to defend our ideas, we try to write storylines that are great, we try to sell our ideas. But the first inclination of a philosopher is to be as rough on your own idea as possible. And that we call counterexamples. So we look at some idea, we might want to go into a certain market, or we might want to think about things in a particular way. The first thought of a philosopher is to say, what would be the opposing view? What would be the view of someone else that actually didn't agree? And once you have the opposing views, you radicalize them as much as you can. You're as angry on your own at your own idea as you possibly can be. And that leads you to have extraordinarily stealth in your ideas if they stand up to that sort of test. So providing counterexamples to your own ideas is the third thing. The last thing is probably the most important, and it's I don't know if you remember when you were in school, or if you are still in school, there was a type of time after class where you sat down in a coffee shop or in a bar or something, and you knocked around ideas with your friends for 3-4 hours. And if anybody recorded those sessions with my friends, I would hope they never get released online, because they're pretentious. So we're sort of trying to explore ideas that we don't really understand. It's a type of time that is seen as something you ought to grow out of. It's something you shouldn't do once you start working. But I would hope that most of you keep those and protect that kind of time, where you still explore ideas just to explore them. When there's no reason to read Immanuel Kant in a normal Tuesday, but actually the types of things I really learned something from, and the kinds of sessions that stuck with me were those kinds of sessions, where you didn't have a goal, where it wasn't about being productive, where it was just about thinking through things for the sake of thinking through things. And I would hope that we could get a kind of culture, particularly in America, where that is okay, where it's okay to spend time on things that are less linear and more thoughtful in a way. So those were sort of my 4 rules. The first one was, based on what do people think this? So go to the assumption level of things. The second one is slowing down. The third one is counterexamples. And the fourth is protecting this sort of pretentious kind of knocking around issues time. I would hope that a society like this in America, where the kind of sciences that people are hoped to study is the natural sciences, that there is a space for what used to be the humanities. It's something that is cut down in terms of resources. They're closing down the National Endowment of the Arts and so on. It's something that's under pressure. And I hope a lot of people would keep and protect a kind of time that's about just being human and thinking through things. And why? Well, first of all, because it's delightful. And second of all, because it's extraordinarily productive for the rest of your life. That's what I want to say.